Hello all, Alison here. Welcome back to Words and Pictures for what I think should be the last in our Halloween Concertina Tag Book series, and we're tackling the cover. Previous episodes will be linked to the playlist in the description down below, and we're going to have some fun not only with assembling pieces for the cover, but actually creating some pieces for the cover. Anybody who's watched any of my books episodes or anything like that will know that I have quite a substantial collection of vintage glass bottles because I love them. And so my vague idea today is to create something on the cover which is quite close to a couple of my all-time favourite spooky tags, where I constructed a shelf to go on the tag. It's mounted on cardboard so that it's nice and firm, and then just some sort of little vintage bottles, scrolls, skulls. We might not do all of that today, but I do think I want a couple of little vintage bottles, and I've got a shortcut for myself for the shelf construction, which was all rather complicated here, but yeah, we're going to do something altogether simpler, I hope, and I hope it'll be firm enough to hold things up. So that's the plan. So obviously Tim Holtz produces, or has produced over the years, lots of gorgeous little tiny glass bottles. I'm always on the eye out as well, though, for the sort of dollar store versions, and I find that mixing and matching those into a project can mean you're cutting costs. But cutting costs even further, I keep all my packaging from these little things. And if you remember those little word sticks, we did use a couple of them in the collaging session. That I managed to empty that packet, and I've got these, which I think if I cut them out, I can probably create something convincingly glass bottle looking with them. I've also got a couple of plastic tubes which came on some of my either more delicate or more expensive or just showing off kind of watercolor brushes. They come as a protective tube around the brush, not this one because this is a cheap one. So like that, the brushes are in constant use now, so I'm just wondering, it's quite stiff acetate, but I'm hoping I can maybe just snip it and then I could create a jar using those. So it's about mixing and matching. Yes, I am a hoarder of Idea-ology ephemera. I'm guessing a few of you watching may be similarly inclined, but what I try to do is also mix and match and use that with other methods. So I think I'm going to start with some bottles, and then we'll move on to constructing the shelf, because the bottles may need to dry, or I may need to change my thinking. So my first thought is just to see what I can get out of these. I don't need that many today because I'm going to mix and match in with some of these. But I think if I snip each of these individual pieces out, I'm going to have something that looks kind of, I mean, sort of test tubey, but it's definitely got a bottle shape. I think we might trim around these edges to give ourselves a circle. And then one of the things I'm thinking is to get myself a sort of glass bottle look, either aging, which I think I did on some of those, and or maybe some sort of green glass might help convince me. Ooh, hello. So a little bit fiddly, but I think it'll be worth it. And then yeah, we'll paint the bottle tops when we've had a look at what they look like with the glassy look. And the glassy look, I think, given we're working on plastic, the best option is going to be to try with some alcohol ink. We haven't really had the alcohol inks out here on the channel before, I think. But they're incredibly good for tinting plastic or metal, but keeping a translucent look. So I'm gonna go with a little bit of, I don't know what that is, Bayou, and a little bit of Juniper. I don't know if you can hear the train in the background. I think I like the green one better than the blue one, so while that's still wet, I might aim to knock off a bit of the blue, although it's darkening quite nicely. And what I might need to do is put a bit of this on the inside as well to get a fuller colour. And I'm thinking that I might do the same with my actual official little tiny vial. I might put a bit in the inside of that and just shake it around a little bit to get myself some green glass, and then tip out any excess. That's rather nice. Come on, don't need all of you in there. Although by the time you're sat down in the background, that probably looks very dark because it's quite gloomy here today, but that's actually given me a really nice sort of glassy look. I do want to catch just a little bit of that excess ink out again. This is trial and error. I'm playing. This is what playtime should be about, experimenting and just seeing how that ink, it doesn't want to come back down the funnel. There we go. Little shake and tap. That's getting it out. So that has just tinted that glass a beautiful vintage green. In fact, that is pretty darn impressive, right? Very happy with the results of that. So we might put another little drop on this bit of plastic waste here. And just let that continue to spread out. I don't think I want them all green, so I'm going to leave these two tubes as they are, and maybe I'll cut one more of those little chaps. So there's two different depths, so I might cut myself one of the slender ones, just so that we've got some variation in how they'll sit on the shelf, or at least some variation to play with. I'm not saying all of these will make it onto the final project, because we're only going to have the one shelf. Can't fit everything, so I'm gonna use my fingers to spread a bit of that out. There we go. So that's a subtler green look. I mean, you can see very clearly that that has made a difference when you look at it on there. Grand. So let's just wipe that up. If you get alcohol ink on anything, rubbing alcohol is the way to both play with alcohol ink, but also clean it up afterwards if something gets in your way. Yeah, we're probably not going to see it on the shelf, but I'm still a bit bothered by all those spare drops of alcohol ink in there, just because they're annoying me more than I don't like the look of them. I don't understand why they won't come out. I know what I need. I need a cotton bud. I wonder if I've got a cotton bud in the room. Or, well, we just stick a paintbrush in. Is that going to catch them? Yeah, there we go. Some things I want to sort out. So that will need cleaning if I want to clean that very cheap brush. Grand. So that's all rather good. I want to grunge this up a little bit, this cork. So I'll do that, I think, with just a little bit of ink. Let's put a little bit of walnut stain here. Just a little patch. Shall I zoom in a little bit so you can get a closer look at what's going on? So those are my little green glass vintage bottles, looking rather gorgeous, if I do say so myself. Another thing to do, if you don't want them quite so shiny, what I did with these to get a sort of frosted look was I put on, I think it was just some matte medium just over the top of the glass, and it gave it this sort of, oh, sorry, that's the trouble with zooming in. I gave it a little coat of, I think, some matte medium that gave this just a sort of little frosted look, which is also quite nice. It ages it a little bit. So this is the matte collage medium, which is just going to take some of the shine off that glass. If I just smear it on, it'll dry matte, obviously, and will just mean we've got slightly less shininess. This is one of the advantages to having put that alcohol ink on the inside. I'm not quite sure how it'll respond to having matte medium smeared over it, but it should be it should be all right because the alcohol ink shouldn't respond to moisture. It's a whole separate formulation. That seems okay. The only moisture it should react with would be something like rubbing alcohol. There we go. Oh, and let's put a bit of that on this tube as well while we're at it, just to give ourselves a slightly matte look on this plastic. I think that's going to be quite effective in terms of just, yeah, distracting our eye from the fact that it's a bit of plastic tubing. What I put in it will also make a difference, of course. Let's see. Okay, I'm gonna try just snipping that with my shears and see if I can get a straight line across the top. Oh, I don't know what flew everywhere then. Yeah, that's not bad. That's pretty good. If I want to put anything in there, I'm either going to have to put a base on it, which I could do by just gluing it to some card and trimming it, or I need to glue it to my shelf and then fill it up. So we'll see. If I fill it up, I'm then obviously going to need to put a stopper on it as well. So we'll see how we go. We might just paint the inside of that so it looks as though it's got something in it. I was in the middle of just grunging this up a bit, wasn't I? Just with that walnut stain ink onto the cork there, just to give it a bit of muckiness, a bit of murkiness. Might want a bit more. Might go with, in fact, even some oxide. That being opaque will have a slightly different look to it. So again, I'm just putting a smear of ink onto the mat. Move those out of the light. Little spritz of water. You can see I've been gathering little labels to use on my bottles. That's better. And that's also the kind of thing I'm going to want to do. Oh, I see what went vanishing. What went flying was one of my little green bottles. There it is. Okay. Put a little dot of that on there as well. While the matte medium's there, that dark ink is going to adhere to the medium, although it wouldn't probably adhere to shiny. It won't, in fact. Distress inks won't colour glass or plastic directly, but while that matte medium was still a little bit wet, that brown ink was perfectly happy to kind of take on there. Great. Let's see. Let's start digging out some labels. So I've pulled out labels that are from the Curator labels, that are, some of them are from this sticker book, I think, some of them from Halloween ephemera. I've also got this very ancient, no longer available, I'm afraid, tissue tape, Tim Holtz tissue tape, and I definitely used some of that on these previous bottles. In fact, I'm thinking that might be quite a good label, excuse me, to go around the tall tube there. And I might keep the skull separate so I can put him elsewhere. In fact, it's not even going to make it all the way around, is it? I mean, it's going to make it all the way around. We're not even going to see the whole of the word poison if we're not careful. That is, I mean, as if designed. There's still sort of slightly damp matte medium under there, collage medium, so I'm counting on that to help the now somewhat aged tissue tape to stick. I might have to zoom out again a little bit just because I keep going off camera, don't I? Apologies. Let's just... Hopefully that'll strike a decent balance between me constantly going off camera and you actually being able to see what's going on. So on these little plastic ones, I think I'm going to try for just a little spot of paint on my lids. It's going to need to be acrylic paint. I could use distress paint. Obviously I've got Fresco paints all around me. And I think that's going to be the way to just get some stoppers on the top of here. There is, because of the little ring at the end of the metal pieces that were the package, this was the packaging for, there is a little sort of round topping here that I think we can kind of pretend is a stopper. Let me grab some paint. Here we go. It's a little bit of my French roast Fresco paint. I'm really not going to need much. I'm just going to need what, from shaking the paint, has just been in the top there. And I'm just going to make that be a little cork stopper in the top of there. And French roast, of course, is a translucent Fresco, but if I apply it with enough presence, I think it'll give me a decent fake. These are obviously going to go in the background. They're not going to be as effective or as beautiful as having proper glass, but I think they're going to do a nice job of just being sort of fake little bottles somewhere in the background. Let's give that one. Yeah. Okay, it's building, I can feel it. I'm going to add some Fresco to this as well. So when you're altering stuff like this for a vintage look or for an old look or a distressed look, it's just a question of keeping an eye on what's happening, just noticing when something looks good. So I've just got some French roast left on the brush. I'm just using that to grunge up the base of this bottle a little bit. Who knows what ancient potions are in there. And this is all sort of prompted by the fact that so much of that collaging we ended up doing turned out to have poison labels and apothecary labels and all of that kind of business. That's all in the previous episode. If you want to take a look. Might be 2 episodes back. I can't remember what order we did everything in now. I'm sort of slightly tempted to go with a little bit of green on here again. And again, the green is partly influenced by the fact that I love vintage bottles, and so therefore I want some green alcohol ink to play with. But is also, green has been the colour tying this little album together. So I think it's quite nice to continue that green look down into these glassy pieces. So that's a really subtle green tint, and that's working very nicely. So I'm going to put a little bit in from the other end as well, just around the rim. And I don't mind that I've got this sort of blue rim going on. That's part now of my vintage glass bottle, like a chemist bottle in an old chemistry lab. Little tint more. You can see it's trial and error. The brush is taking ink away. I'm putting ink in, the brush is taking ink away, until I get myself to the place where, excuse me, I believe in my little glass container. So that's all looking quite nice. I need to put some labels on things. So round these, I just need something quite small. Let's maybe go with that. Yeah, I'm going to bend in advance because that's just going to help things to glue. That's about the right distance. And I think, as I did on the tag, I'm going to put a couple of labels on each of them because I think that can be quite impactful. That's nice. Just round that little bottle. And then this, there's enough of that I could use it in 2 places. So I'm just going to take a little bit of that to go on the front here. This is going to be acrylic glue again, should do the job. Plastic can be a bit tricky to glue to sometimes, but it's just paper that I'm gluing, so I'm hoping that this will get the job done in a manner that is at least convincing enough for the eye to glance at. I'm just creating a bit of pressure around there. I'll be able to trim these later. It's going to need some more on the side. Don't blame it, I didn't really get much glue on the side there. Also, there's a little bit of plastic rim still sticking up. So a good pinch to get that to glue, and we'll trim it once it's had a chance to glue itself a bit better. And then I think we might put a little bit of that directly below. Yeah, that's good. But I might trim it to the right size for the front of here rather than trying to bend it round the corners. Good. Again, I'm going to let that dry and then trim. This is why we did glass bottles first, you see. Let that dry and then trim. Okay, who else? You've got one of those labels, but we might want to give you something else. there's this lovely skull that I feel should play a part somewhere. Maybe we'll put him round this little plastic bottle because he's looking least effective so far. So giving him a nice skull will just distract the eye from what that is. Hopefully that tissue tape is, no, I was hoping it might still be sticky enough, but I don't think it is. Not to stick to plastic. It would have stuck to some paper. Go on. Best at some point to just leave it be and let it get on with it. I just want to slide it down a bit so I can see a bit of glass at the top. There we go. Let that dry. And I'm going to stick some more labels on some more of these. You can see how it works. And I'll be back for the next steps. So a quick little look at that. I've just put some table salt into this, so we've got a lovely container full of stuff. The others, I think I'm just going to live with them being labeled bottles for now. They're going to be in the background and they're going to be sort of subliminal. I've mostly trimmed them. That one could do with a bit more of a trim, but I'm pretty happy with what I've got going on bottles wise now. We may or may not use this big jar. That I can always find other homes for these things. So I'm thinking for this shelf, this one I constructed with, I think, cardboard. I used some design tape over it. That's just painted at the bottom. Design tape around the edges to just clear up the edge of that. There are even some little metal brackets I used. Very cheapy. In fact, I think I chopped up. I wonder if I still got one of those sitting around here. I did have for a long time. Yes. So it was, I think, one of these metal filigree, very skinny bits of stuff that I chopped out some ornate metal brackets to create the shelf. I'm hoping I won't need that because my plan is to use these very chunky quote chips, both as the shelf and to support the shelf. So I'm thinking, now what did I did do a bit of thinking about this. So I've got one here, a chopped up field notes, I think. Maybe I didn't. Maybe field does come by itself. I can't, well, I say I can't see me using field. I create meadows all the time, don't I? So I was thinking that was one that I didn't really need. Happy Halloween, I think I definitely don't, in the long run, really need. So that, I'm thinking, can be a support for my shelf. Elixirs and potions is, I think, my main choice of shelf. And then I'm thinking one of these as the upright shelf to hold it. And whether we keep that as foreboding or what, I don't know if anybody's ever done this, what you can do is it's quite easy to split these just by sticking your nail in the edge. And then I get to keep foreboding for a future go. And I've still got a perfectly sturdy shelf to create my holding place for bottles. And I think what I might do is cover that with a bit of design paper. I've got one of the Halloween backdrops just sitting here, which is a great, just, you know, murky, distressed kind of affair. And I think just a little layer of that on the top could be quite exciting, because we don't want it bright white, really. That's not very Halloween-y. So I'm just going to stick it on the end of there. I think for the moment I'm going to live with what the edge of the shelf looks like. I could, well, see, could I? Could fold a bit of that over onto the edge, just for our front edge. See, off camera again, my apologies. I'm going to zoom out in a minute because I would rather you have to zoom in on your device, but that you can see what's going on, than me having to try to keep remembering to hold my thing in a 2-inch square space. Life's too short, you know? So, there we go. Let's trim around the edge of that. Trim off the back of that. I am going to need this flush because that's the bit that's going to go against the back of the tag. I think that's pretty good as a really swift bit of shelf building. And I'm definitely going to keep that piece of backdrop paper around because that's going to be useful for all kinds of things. That's going to be in the shadow underneath. What I might do is just give it a little darkening of ink. I've got my scorched timber somewhere here, which is the darkest of all the darks. And I'm just going to use that too. There you go. Straight away, more of a wood look. And that's going to be the underside, so you're really not going to see that. And then my thought is that if this is layered up on enough shelf, that's going to hold. What's quite a pity about Happy Halloween is it's sticking out. Elixirs and Potions is the exact depth I need to go under that shelf. Happy Halloween I was just thinking of to create a bit more depth, a bit more support for the shelf, but I am going to need to trim off the edge. Part of my problem with Happy Halloween is happiness is surely the last possible thing you want to wish somebody. You want somebody to have a spooky Halloween or a frightening Halloween or a eerie Halloween. A happy one is kind of contradiction in terms, isn't it? So my thing is, I don't think I'll ever use that particular quote chip, so I'm going to use it as backing. Now, before I glue any of that down, I want to have a little look at what things are going to look like. I do think I want to scull one of these magnificent Idea-ology skulls. There have been various editions of those. The originals are almost my favourites. There are some really gory ones in places, but as I say, I'm a lover of a skull. I've mentioned this before. I think their structures, their beauty, and the fact that they're the place that hold the mind of a human, well, or of any animal. Yeah, that's going to be good. What sort of height are we going to get if we go with the bottles? Where's my salts? Something like that. I want those about halfway up. So I think it's going to be about there. And we'll see how many of these get on the shelf in the long run. Yeah, good. So I had also been playing with having sort of various dynamic cross pieces. I really rather like those textures. The trouble with that is, if I have that in place, that is going to interfere with the gluing down and the flatness of this. I do still quite like it. So what I might try and do is trim so that I can go top and bottom underneath and over the top of the shelf without getting in the way of flat gluing and support gluing here. So in other words, fake its continuity. I want that sticking out over the edge a little bit. No, because that's going to mean our shelf sticks out over the edge a little bit as well, which I think is not a good idea. So mind changes again. That kind of like so. I wanted a few bits of echoing of some of the internal collaging. Thinking something like that's quite good. Maybe a couple of labels. Something like that. You want another red one? Maybe. I used little bits of this red one. I trimmed little bits off to create additional red labelling on our poison bottles. So one label can do a world of work. Fade proof join here. I'm just quite enjoying the dynamism of those lines. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to have a little bit of a fiddle around with this until I've got mostly my background as I want it, and then we'll come back and glue our shelves and bottle into place. Back shortly. Quick little bit on shelf construction. So I've glued these two pieces together, so they're nice and stable, and I'm now going to glue this to here, no, other way, with the back. So this hopefully is going to make one stable background piece to glue to the tag. So I'm now going to put a little bit of glue across the top of here. And the good thing is this bit here at the edges of the quote chips is nice, rough card. Let's just make sure. So that's the front of my shelf. That's going against the back of the tag. Don't you drip down there. So I need those lined up as close to a flat edge as I can get them. And then that's going to give me a lovely, stable one piece. So glue it and then leave it is going to be the key here. Really let it dry. So that's good firm pressure I'm giving it to give that a chance to make contact. And then I'm going to put it to one side and let it completely dry. Grand. In the meantime, I've been gluing down some other bits and bobs, just as we did with the collaging on the inside, but with sort of half an eye out for how this was all going to fit together once I've got my jars on. I haven't quite decided which jars are going to make the cut yet, but I think it's time to glue this shelf in position. And as you can see, I've done my I've kept a space in between so that we've got the best possible gluing surface for this to stick to. I didn't want it having to go over all those lumps and bumps. And now it's kind of moment of truth to just get that in position and hope that we've got enough flat surface for that to get a good strong adhesion. And then again, before I start messing around with putting skulls and bottles and so on in place. Oh, I love this torn bit of paper here. That's making me so happy. I'm again going to set that aside to dry and just create myself a couple of really quick little scrolls. As you saw on here, that's just some folded bits of book page and yeah, inked a little bit, rolled. Now, did I roll them sideways? No, I rolled them so the text was visible. So something, in fact, ripping is better because then you'll get a lovely torn end. I want text visible, fairly straight edge. But that, I mean, this really is as simple as rolling a piece of paper. I think I was zoomed in again. One of these days, I'll get a hold of this. And then I just used a little bit of twine to fasten my scrolls. I think I probably also put, if the scroll's too thick, or actually I think I prefer it not the gessoed side, so gessoed, not gessoed. I think I quite like being able to see those lovely Gothic letters properly, don't you? So that's going to go in there. A little bit of inking again at the edges just to give you that lovely oldie worldy look. Little touch of glue along that outer edge, not right to the outer edge, because it's quite nice to have that little bit sticking up. There we go, scroll of paper. I got a little bit of twine hanging around on the desk. Of course I haven't. I've always got twine hanging around on the desk. Oh, white's quite nice. A couple of times round. And a little knot. Usually easiest to tie your knot before you trim your twine. My fingertips are now all gluey, so I might have to do a little bit of clearing of my fingertips before I go on with much more of this, because it's not making it easier to feel what's happening. Go on, through you go. And tie. There we go. Then trim. So I think I just want a couple of those on standby in case I need something to fill up shelf space. So I'm going to make a couple more of those, and I am going to grab my twine because the final finishing touch I need to do is put some toppers into my tags, and I'm thinking probably a combination of my much loved fine twine. I've got some of that, you remember the ribbon we did the binding with? Ooh, yes, look, that's the other thing. I don't want this. I think I've decided now. I quite like this still here. I know it's not exactly functional because it only fastens one side, but I like the look of it. But I don't want these shiny taupe ribbons anymore. So they're coming off. They're our binding. If you've seen the binding and construction episode, and I've hung on and hung on and hung on, because, you know, they might have been a thing I wanted. I'm quite enjoying the frayed edges of them there, so I'm happy to encourage that to happen and not make a clean cut, because that's just a little bit of extra texture, right? But I don't want them sticking out anymore. They're now starting to distract me. In any case, what I was in the middle of saying was that I took a little bit of that shiny ribbon and had a little experiment with a bunch of different things. I used Distress Spray Stain and some acrylic paint, and got myself instead some kind of nice rusty ribbon. And then the other thing I'm just wondering about is maybe whether we alternate that with twine and maybe some Salvaged Patina kind of coloured crinkled ribbon. So that's going to be the very final step. We'll get to that. I'm going to make a couple more scrolls, and then while that's drying, and then we'll be back to glue these down and maybe dye some crinkle ribbon. Oh, this is final stages. It's so exciting. Okay, this shelf is pretty darn sturdy, I would say. And in any case, these things are also going to be glued with a little bit of contact to the back of the shelf. In any case, part of my brain is deciding I don't really want this big jar. I think this big jar is going to live to play another day. We'll see. Let's have a look. You and you. See, these are great. I mean, it's just that plastic waste we used, but as soon as I put it on the shelf and it's in amongst everything else, I completely buy that as a little bottle. And it was a good idea to do the flatter version and the other version, because it means they've got different dimension on there. See, this, I mean, I love this, but I think it needs to hide on the back shelf of an apothecary somewhere rather than being so prominent on the front of a tag. So I'm thinking it's probably more like that and that, a little bit of that texture visible behind. I think maybe the skull in here, something like that. And then he'll also get to lean on one of those bottles. I've got a couple of these fabulous Boneyard bones that could also, maybe one of those in amongst the scrolls. Let's get these glued down first, because that's going to give us a sense of how much space we've got to play with. So I've got my gloopy glue out. Again, this is the Liquitex, super heavy, matte medium. And for the weighty objects, so I'm thinking the skull and the bottle, that's definitely going to be what I want in action. I don't really want that flat against the back, so how did I had it on sort of that corner edge is where I want the glue mostly. And if I put that down, that sort of peanut butter consistency, that's the word I'm after, that peanut butter cream cheese consistency is already holding that in place. So he is going to go, let's maybe do these first. This I could do with my fine application glue, but I just need to go around the very edges of that little plastic bit. He's going to go in there, go around the very edges of that little plastic bit. So actually applying this with the stick is quite good. This glue will dry clear, so I don't need to be worrying about any of that, even if there is some showing. And because it's matte, that's one of the reasons I like the matte super heavy gel. It's not going to glow and catch the light as much as if I were using a gloss glue. Oh, I could, yeah, a little bit at the bottom as well, just in case I've got contact at the bottom. Because of the little ridges on the edges of these plastic ones, it's not necessarily making full contact with the floor of the shelf, as it were, but I think I've got reasonable contact with the back there. Grand. And so you should hopefully just slot in there quite nicely. Yep. So I need a bit on the bottom, like so, and a little bit again on the sort of back corner of the skull. And we could also put just a little bit on the front corner of that, because it's where your temple is going to rest. Let's have a look at that. That's pretty good, right? Good distribution of bits and bobs. Sort of like you just a little further over. You do have a little wiggle room with this, but you don't want to mess around too often. But there is some drying time which allows you to just shift things around a little bit if you need to. But I'm pretty happy with that. And then I'm wondering if we maybe want a little bone heading up there. That's quite funny. I quite like that. I wonder if I can get it to glue. So a little bit down there, a little bit up here where it's making contact. Let's see if we can see it. I'll never recapture that first fine careless rapture. Never recapture the first fine careless rapture of where that bone landed, but I'm hoping, let's have a little poke with a tweezer. Hoping that'll stay put. That's quite good. I like that. I think I might just want one scroll on this lower corner. It's a little bit big, a little bit thick, a little bit clumsy. So that's easily solved. You just need to make a shorter one. Shorter, smaller, thinner, so less paper rolled. And maybe slightly less long. So you get to choose. If the scroll is not doing the thing you need the scroll to do, make another scroll. So I had one short fat one long fat one, but I want something altogether subtler. So I'm just going to give that a roll. There we go. Little one of those. There's no way this is just a few minutes of fun, is it? Well, it's not really a few minutes of fun. It's the Halloween tag book, and it's going to take as long as it takes to get things as we want them. That in there, that in there, and there's a one last little bit of twine hanging around. Round it goes. Tie it up. That's better. Little trim, I think, for those. Don't think you want them sticking out quite as much as they are. So him just on that lower corner there, I think is quite good. Yep, grand. Let's do that. And maybe there's room for another bone. That would be fun. Maybe lying in front of here. Yes, I like that. Okay, a little touch of that. And that's my shelf load of goodies. And I'm hoping, there's no way to test this out in advance, that if you stand your accordion album on the shelf, even with the front as heavily weighted as that, that's going to stand up. That's a delight. That's what I was hoping. Couldn't tell until I glued it all down whether that was actually going to work, and it does. So I'm thrilled with that. Right, so going to let that dry a little bit more, and while I'm doing that, let's just get a couple of ribbons ready for topping. So as I said, I've dyed this with a combination of distress stain and paint to get myself rusty ribbon. I've got obviously fine twine. And then the other thing that I have always loved doing from right at the very beginning, if you go back and look at the early days of my blog, way back in 2012, when I had maybe 3 stamp sets, 4 colours of distress ink, and just went round and round and round, playing and playing and playing and exploring and exploring and exploring with those very few ingredients. One very early ingredient was what was then known as crinkle ribbon. It was sold by Idea-ology as crinkle ribbon, but in fact is the very cheap seam binding that if you've got a haberdasher's or even a milliner might have it, you can use this to create lovely crinkle ribbon, because it's basically the same stuff. So Salvaged Patina, oh that's, hello, there we are. Salvaged Patina, just because it's going to give us something that is going to echo again the turquoises and greens. You can do this with an ink pad as well. I can smoosh ink onto the mat with an ink pad. But this just happens to be what I'm up to today. Oh, that's a bit much peeled paint. I don't really want all that peeled paint. Pick some up again. And a little smooth spritz of water, both onto the ribbon and onto the ink. And then this is real messy finger time. Just dyeing that. And the joy of this is, what you want to do is crinkle it and let it dry. I want a little bit more turquoise in the mix, so I can go directly onto the ribbon, and then that's going to give me little patches of variegated colour, which is just a joy. You can dry that with a heat tool. You can let that dry. I'm too impatient to let it dry at this point. I think I want to get to assemblage. And the joy is that you can also create the difference. If you use a Distress Oxide, you'll get some more opaque specks on that ribbon. And I think in a Halloween-y kind of way, that might be quite nice to have. So I'm going to put on just a couple of bits of Distress Oxide into the mix. So that's going to create a more of a linen-y look than the translucent inks will. So I'm going to crinkle it up and give it a good strong blast with the heat tool. Thread it through the tops here. And then I think we're going to be there. And sort of at my plan at the moment is this does the Halloween tag book. So those episodes are done. We're still in a bit of a mix on tag time and a few minutes of fun. So coming your way on Wednesday is a few minutes of fun. And you'll see why. That's a special episode that had to happen before Halloween. So I'm squeezing it in on a Wednesday, even though it's a few minutes of fun. And then what I might do is do a proper flip through of this to go live on Halloween night. Hallows Eve. Night is redundant. All Hallows Eve. I'll post a full flip through of this album. But obviously I'll dive in for a close-up with these ribbons at the end of this video. I hope that you've enjoyed the process. I hope that you've enjoyed that bit of cover work as much as I have. That I just find thrilling. So thank you for your company. As always, leave comments and questions down below. Always a treat to hear from you. And I will try to list ingredients, though as usual, the Halloween ideology stuff changes season by season. So you won't be able to source necessarily these exact products, but you can find similar things. And as I hope you saw, dollar store purchases and even scrap plastic can also be your ally in these games. Thanks so much for your company, and happy crafting all. Sorry, I just had to hop back on to show you my fingers. So if you want to give me an inky thumbs up, please do that. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do that. It's a joy to have your company on this creative journey. Stick around for the close-up. Happy crafting all.